The final twilight of 394 AD draped over Rome like a shroud of pure gold. Theodosius, the last emperor of a unified Roman Empire, returned from the Frigidus battlefield with a resounding victory over the usurper Eugenius. But that victory came at the cost of the last drops of blood from the exhausted Western army, the burden of a vast empire stretching from the misty lands of Britannia to the scorching desert of Aegyptus, from the Strait of Gibraltar to the distant Euphrates River, weighed heavily on the frail shoulders of a man fading away. Theodosius, the great Christian emperor who had crushed paganism and temporarily bound together the fractured empire, was now but a shadow in the Mediolanum Milan palace. The atmosphere in the Mediolanum palace was suffocating. Incense could not mask the pungent smell of bitter medicinal brews and sickness. Theodosius lay on the bed, his breath shortening, his face gaunt. Beside him were his most loyal, Stilicho, the half-Vandal general but military pillar, Rufinus, the ambitious Gallic official, Magister Officiorum of the East, and two very young princes, Arcadius, 18 years old, solemn but indecisive, and Honorius, only 10 years old, timid, his eyes bewildered. "Father," Arcadius called softly, his voice trembling. Honorius could only clutch his father's hand tightly, tears streaming down. Theodosius opened his eyes, his gaze weary, but still radiating authority. He looked at his two sons, then at Stilicho and Rufinus. A fateful decision had ripened in his mind. Throughout the long months of war and illness, this empire was too vast, too complex. Too many enemies lurked on every frontier. One ruler, no matter how capable, could not shoulder it alone. The lessons from Diocletian and Constantine were still there. Divide and rule. But this time would be different. This was not a temporary administrative division. This was a permanent demarcation. Stilicho, Rufinus. Theodosius's voice was weak but clear. "I'll entrust the West to Honorius. Stilicho, you shall be regent, his protector. Entrust the East to Arcadius. Rufinus, you shall assist him." A violent cough interrupted. The two halves must support each other, but each rules his own land. This is the final will of mine. On January 17th, 395, Theodosius the Great breathed his last. The news spread like lightning across a clear sky, with dizzying speed from Mediolanum to Constantinople, from Londinium to Antiochia. The Roman Empire, though often administratively divided under emperors like Diocletian with the Tetrarchy or Constantine, had always been considered a unified entity under one supreme Augustus. The death of Theodosius and his will officially tore the soul of the Roman world in two. The East, Arcadius and Constantinople, the golden fortress on the Bosporus. Arcadius, under the scheming assistance of Rufinus, was formally crowned Augustus of the East in Constantinople. This city, built by Constantine the Great on the site of ancient Byzantium, was a masterpiece of prosperity and strategy. Positioned guarding the Bosporus Strait, the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Constantinople possessed boundless wealth, the hub of trade from the Silk Road and sea routes from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Customs duties flowed like a stream. The fertile fields of Egypt and Asia Minor provided abundant grain, an impregnable defensive position, surrounded by sea and the massive Theodosian walls, later fortified by Theodosius II. The city was nearly invulnerable to the tribal forces of the West. A strong administrative machinery, inheriting and developing from Diocletian's time, the Eastern bureaucracy operated efficiently. collected taxes regularly, and maintained order. Ancient Greek culture. The primary language was Greek, a deep and more tolerant Hellenized culture created strong social cohesion. The Christian religion was also tightly organized. However, Arcadius lacked competence and was easily manipulated. Real power lay in the hands of ministers like Rufinus, later eliminated, then Eutropius, and finally the ambitious empress Aelia Eudoxia. Power struggles within the court were a constant threat. External dangers primarily came from the powerful Sassanid Persian Empire in the east, always eyeing the wealthy provinces of Mesopotamia and Armenia. But thanks to abundant resources and strategic position, the east could cope relatively effectively. The west, Honorius and Ravenna, the mire amidst the storm. Honorius, a 10-year-old boy, was placed on the throne in Mediolanum. The real power holder was Stilicho, the talented, loyal, but also ambitious general, holding the title Magister Militum, commander-in-chief of the army. However, the West faced countless challenges: bankrupt economy, the wealthy provinces of North Africa, wheat, olive oil, and Spain, minerals, were constantly threatened with disruption. Taxes were hard to collect. Inflation raged. Currency devalued severely. The agricultural economy was devastated by war and heavy taxation. A disintegrating army. After the Frigidus battle, the core forces of the Western army were almost gone. Stilicho had to rely on mercenary tribal soldiers, foederati, Goths, Huns, Alans. Their loyalty was to the commander, who paid them more than to the empire. Discipline and combat skills declined drastically. The unceasing wave of tribes, Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, Suebi, Burgundians, Franks, Alemanni, pushed by the Huns from the east, flooded across the Rhine and Danube rivers. They not only plundered, but also settled, demanding land, demanding autonomy within imperial territory. Assimilation efforts failed. A crumbling administrative machinery. Corrupt, incompetent officials. Communication between provinces was slow and easily disrupted. The central government increasingly lost control over localities. An unstable capital. Mediolanum was vulnerable to attack from the north. In 402, after being threatened by the Gothic king Alaric, Honorius, and the court fled to Ravenna, a coastal city surrounded by marshes, easily defensible but cramped and isolated, symbolizing the withdrawal and fear of the West, conflict with the East. Stilicho always harbored ambitions to regain control of the Illyricum provinces, Balkans, from the east, leading to tension and lack of cooperation between the two halves of the empire, weakening both. The decades after 395 witnessed the West drowning in violence and decline. Alaric and the Visigoths, as foederati, but treated poorly and lacking supplies. Alaric led the Visigoths in revolt. Stilicho defeated them several times, but could not destroy them. Conflict within the Ravenna court, opposed by factions suspected of plotting to put his own son on the throne, led to Stilicho being executed on Honorius's orders. Swayed by whispers, in 408, the death of the last capable general was a mortal blow. With no one left to restrain them, Alaric marched his troops right to the gates of Rome. On August 24th, 410, the Eternal City fell for the first time in 800 years, plundered for 3 days. This shock reverberated throughout the civilized world. Honorius remained safe in Ravenna like a cowering snail. the influx of tribes, the power vacuum after Stilicho's death, and Honorius's uselessness led other tribes to pour in. Vandals, Alans, and Suebi crossed the frozen Rhine. In 406, ravaged Gaul, then crossed the Pyrenees into Spain. Burgundians settled around the Rhine. Franks expanded in northern Gaul. Vandals under King Genseric became masters of the sea, capturing prosperous North Africa, the vital grain supply source for Rome and Ravenna. In 439, the loss of North Africa was a death blow to the already exhausted Western economy. Puppet emperors. Western emperors after Honorius, like Valentinian III, were mere puppets in the hands of powerful tribal or Romanized tribal military commanders, like Aetius, who defeated Attila at the Catalonian plains in 451, but was later killed by the emperor himself, and Ricimer, Gothic, who effectively ruled the empire during the final chaotic period. Real power fell into the hands of military warlords. The death of an empire. 476 was a symbolic milestone. Odoacer, a tribal leader of Syrian or Rugian origin, commander of mercenaries in the Roman army, rebelled. He deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last boy emperor, around 14 to 16 years old, of the West in Ravenna. Odoacer did not claim the imperial title, but sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople to the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno, declaring there should be only one emperor in Constantinople, and styled himself King of Italy, Rex Italia, ruling nominally under the Eastern Emperor. In practical terms, this was the end of the Western Roman Empire. Independent tribal kingdoms had replaced Roman power across Western Europe, while the West sank into the long night of the Middle Ages. The East not only survived, but revived brilliantly under a new name, the Byzantine Empire, named after Byzantion, the old name of Constantinople, the age of Justinian, 527-565. This was the peak of the revival. Emperor Justinian, and the talented Empress Theodora. Military revival. Under the command of gifted generals like Belisarius and Narses, the Byzantine army reconquered much of the western Mediterranean, North Africa from the Vandals, Italy from the Ostrogoths, and a strip of land in Spain from the Visigoths. Although these conquests were not durable, except for Italy, which was held longer, they temporarily restored Roman glory. Justinian's Code, Corpus Juris Civilis, a monumental work systematizing and updating ancient Roman law, becoming the foundation for the legal systems of many European countries. Or great architecture, constructed the Hagia Sophia, Church of Holy Wisdom, in Constantinople, a timeless architectural masterpiece symbolizing the greatness of Christianity and the empire. The power of adaptation. The Byzantine Empire survived for nearly 1,000 years after the West's fall until 1453, thanks to the strong finances, stable tax revenues from trade and agriculture allowed for maintaining a professional army and efficient administration, clever diplomacy, using marriage, bribery, division, and flexible alliances to deal with countless enemies: Persians, Arabs, Bulgarians, Kievan Rus, Crusaders, Seljuk Turks, then Ottomans. Elite army developed flexible tactics, combining heavy cavalry, cataphract, archers, and Greek fire, a terrifying incendiary mixture for naval warfare. Unique culture preserved the Greco-Roman heritage but developed into a unique Eastern Christian culture with Greek as the primary language and distinctive art and architecture. The Orthodox Church was a spiritual and political pillar. The fortress of Constantinople, the mighty walls and strategic location, made the city an impregnable fortress for centuries. The division of 395 was not merely an administrative event, it was a great turning point that reshaped the world. The birth of medieval Europe. The collapse of the West paved the way for the rise of tribal kingdoms: Frankish, Visigothic, Ostrogothic, Vandal, Anglo-Saxon, forming the new political and ethnic map of Europe. The fusion of Roman culture, Christianity, and Germanic tribal traditions laid the foundation of medieval Europe. The East shines. The Byzantine Empire became the preserver of ancient Greco-Roman heritage, literature, philosophy, science, law, throughout what was considered the Dark Ages in Western Europe. It was the shield protecting Europe from invasions from the East, Persians, Arabs, Turks. For many centuries, the schism between East and West, the deepening differences between the East, Hellenized, Orthodox, and the West, Latinized, Roman Catholic, led to the Great Schism of 1054, dividing Christianity into Catholic and Orthodox, a rift that persists today. Lessons in governance and adaptation. The fall of the West is an eternal warning about the consequences of internal division, economic exhaustion, an army overly dependent on mercenaries, and incompetent leadership. Conversely, the endurance of the East shows the importance of a strong center of power, a solid economic base, efficient administration, wise diplomacy, and the ability to adapt to circumstances. The myth of Holy Rome. Despite the West's fall, the idea of a unified, universal Roman Empire lived on. It was revived in name by the Pope and Frankish kings, especially Charlemagne, crowned Roman Emperor by the Pope in 800 and later by the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire in Central Europe. The Eastern Romans, Byzantines, always considered themselves the true Romans, Romaioi, until their very end. In 395, the death of Theodosius the Great was not simply the succession of his two sons. It was the permanent bifurcation of a world. On one side, the West, with its capital sinking in the marshes of Ravenna, struggled in chaos and slowly disintegrated under the irresistible pressure of history, leaving fragments from which a new Europe would arise. On the other side, the East, with the proud golden fortress of Constantinople, rose to become a new empire, the Byzantine Empire, seizing the torch of Greco-Roman civilization, shining brilliantly and enduring resiliently for another millennium as a bridge between antiquity and modernity, between East and West. The division that year not only drew borders on a map, but also carved a fateful incision into human history, a testament to the harsh vicissitudes of empires and the ceaseless formation of new worlds from the ashes of the past. The sound of Gothic horses before the walls of Rome and the radiant glow of the Hagia Sophia's dome forever remain, two opposing images marking the irreparable rift of the empire that once ruled the entire world.